Okay, I'm going to do one of these stats videos. I fucking love doing these stats videos, probably because I live in the UK and I'm an atheist and it's always quite warming, the stats. If I lived in the United States, probably not quite so. Although if you do live in the United States, probably still quite a nice video because it will show you that not everywhere around the world thinks just quite like you do with regard to religion, which I know is a bit of a bugbear for people in the United States that aren't very religious, really, just how dominant it is with regard to politics. If you live in other countries in Western Europe, this is just a UK survey I'm going through here, but if you've got a similar balance between religiosity and irreligiosity, I'd propose that these statistics would probably be somewhat mirrored in your country, so you might find this interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a survey today. It was commissioned by The Times, carried out by YouGov on the 8th and 9th of February this year, 2015. And then in the next video, especially because we've been talking about anti-theism, a survey that was conducted in November time, that video will look at attitudes towards atheism and morality. Can you still be as moral if you're an atheist? Does religion cause more harm than good or more good than harm, etc., etc.? So that's going to be a really interesting one. I find them fascinating, these surveys. This one it's really got two parts, this one. It was a survey of just over 1,500 adults, and what it does is it asks people what their religion is. It asks them whether they believe in God or a spirit, but not a God or neither. But then it moves on to asking some questions. Would you be more likely to vote for David Cameron on the back that he's a Christian, more likely to vote for Ed Miliband on the fact that he's an atheist, blah, blah, blah. So we'll pick out, what I want to do is I'll link you the survey so you can have a peruse of your own. I've picked out a few points that I found particularly interesting that I want to go through. So first off, in the totals column, I want to compare the what is your religion question to the people have different beliefs about God. Which of the following best applies to you? So this is the thing, what is your religion? 42% of people say no religion. I tell you what, I'll shrink myself down a little bit so you can see a bit more of the sheet. 42% say no religion. Just on that no religion question, if we look at the next sheet, what sometimes people think, and I know I've sometimes thought about this, is that maybe a lot of people answer no religion. They still believe in God, but they just don't see themselves allied to a religion. In actual fact, only 4% of people fulfilled that criteria. They believe in a God, but they put themselves down as no religion. So we can rule that out. That no religion, that 42% said no religion, effectively they don't believe in a God. 49% Christian, and we're mainly going to dwell on Christians because there was only about another 5% outside of that with the other religions. So effectively though, we're talking 42% no religion, 54% have a religion, and then you've got all you don't knows. Interesting then, when you then take that to do you believe in God? I believe there is a God, 32%. 20% don't believe in God but believe in a spiritual power. 33% don't believe in God or a spiritual power, and then you've got you don't knows. Now the interesting thing is there, 54% were religious, claim to have a religion, but only 32% believe in a God. So that's quite a big, that's like 22% there, which was like that's about 2/5. It was about 40% of those that have a religion don't fucking believe in a God. I found that a really shocking statistic in many respects. It then breaks it down. We know in the United States that religion is polarized quite heavily along political lines. I've shown before, because I've made 2 videos before on the statistics, that isn't the same in the UK. It bears it out here in this chart, but it emphasises a few other things. I'm just going to deal with the Conservative and Labour Party. Of course, the Conservatives are the right-wing party, the Labour Party are the left-wing party. It also talks about Lib Dem and UKIP. I'm not going to get too interested in those. What I will say is what's interesting is of those 4 parties, probably politically, the most extreme party is UKIP, and yet in terms of irreligiosity and religiosity, the extreme party is the Lib Dems. They are the real outlier, with 58% of the Lib Dems having no religion. Only 33% of the Lib Dems are Christian. But in terms of the main two parties then, the right-wing Conservatives and the left-wing Labour, when it comes to no religion, there is that same kind of right-left divide that you see in American politics. Not quite so extreme. No religion, the right-wing party, the Conservatives, 32%, Labour, 42%. So more people that have no religion. Christians, 61%. Of the Conservatives are Christians, only 48%, 13% difference there with the Labour Party. So that shows that kind of difference. But when we cut down the bottom of the table again and look at that belief in God question, that rapidly that just dissolves totally. I believe there is a God. In actual fact, 35% of Labour supporters believe in God. Only 34% of Conservative supporters believe in God. So in terms of belief in God, it doesn't really matter which political wing that you're on, which is quite remarkable. What it does show perhaps is something that we would maybe expect with conservative thought. Traditionally, people on the right are more conservative with a small c, and a bit more traditional, and so perhaps they're more likely, even though they don't believe in God, to still see themselves as Christian, as culturally Christian. And I think maybe that just explains the difference that we see there. So I found that really quite an interesting statistic. That was quite an interesting statistic also, because that column was called Westminster V1, and I spent ages trying to work out, what does the Westminster 6 mean? What the fuck is the Westminster 6? This must be some political expression that I've somehow just fucking passed me by over the years. It actually meant Westminster voting intentions when I finally found out what it was. The other thing that I wanted to look at with regard to this was age. I found the age thing quite interesting, which was, again, I've shown you two studies before. One of them was a British social attitude survey, which does it on a cohort basis, or it displays some of the data on a cohort basis, because the survey runs the same questions every 10 years. In the same way as the census does, but it asks different questions to the census, because whereas the census tries to get behind what culturally religion do you regard yourself as, which is why the census data makes the UK look more religious than it is, the British Social Attitude Survey is interested in whether you believe in God and are a Christian, not just whether you culturally regard yourself as a Christian. But that showed that cohort on cohort, in other words, as people go through the decades, the next generation is less likely to declare themselves a Christian, less likely to believe in God than the previous generation. And then I showed you another study, which I think I called a cohort study, but it was more than that. It was, somebody told me it's called a longitudinal study, whereas it's not just keeping people in the same cohort, but it's looking at the exact same individuals. And that showed exactly the same thing. This survey isn't doing that, but it is putting it in age bands. And when we look at those age bands, what a difference we see. As we sweep through the age bands on no religion, we go from only 26% of people in the 60 plus bracket regard themselves as having no religion. As that sweeps down, it goes up to 41%, 52%, and 60% of people in that 18 to 24 bracket regard themselves as having no religion. 22% Christian as opposed to 68% Christian in that 60 plus. If you're asking yourself, yeah, well, are they just going to get more religious as they get older? Is it just that older people are more religious? No. We know from those other studies that they don't, that by and large, as that cohort marches on, it will stay the same. So you would expect in 30 or 40 years the 60 plussers to be 60% no religion, 22% Christian, as long as there isn't a lot of immigration of Christians from Eastern Europe, Muslims from elsewhere. That can obviously alter the data. But if things stand, if you're still looking at the same people, you will see that march through and probably be replaced with fresh cohorts, fresh generations, or even less religious as well. If we look at a question that we haven't looked at with regard to this, which was the if you have no religion, what would you which would you regard yourself as? Atheist, agnostic, blah de blah de blah. So you're just taking that fraction. In the 60 plussers, that 26% in the 60 plussers, 41% regarded themselves as atheist, 23% agnostic, 11% humanist. When we look back at the 18 to 24 year olds, 51% atheist, 13% agnostic. There seems to be an added stridency there, and I don't know whether some of that stridency might be lost, because in the 25 to 39 and 40 to 59 bands you don't see quite so much stridency. So whether that's a stridency which will carry forth, or whether that will be lost, that's a different matter. I don't really know about that one. And the same thing again with those age bands is the belief in God. You know, rather than the religion, we looked at the religion question, the belief in God. Of the 60 plussers, 41% of them believed in God, only 25% of the 18 to 24s. And they're not believing in anything, a quarter, 24% of the 60 plussers. At 46% of 18 to 24 year olds do not believe in God or a spiritual power, a greater spiritual power. That really surprises me. That is amazingly high. That is really quite cheery, that so many people not only have abandoned religion, but haven't just adopted some other load of old bollocks on the back of that. It shows perhaps a slightly more scientific thinking about things. Maybe that's education kicking in. I'm not really sure on that one. I did make a little note on the social grade thing. The statistics aren't remarkable. 44% in the A, B and C1 category. The C2, D and E category, 39%. With regard to Christians, 47% in the higher social categories, 51% in the lower. That's kind of ties in a little bit with what people talk about, I think, with regard to people being a little bit more educated, a little bit more intelligent, tend to be a little bit less religion. Of course, social grade doesn't tally in with intelligence totally, but more intelligent people tend to have better jobs and tend to be slightly more likely to be in the higher social grades. So that kind of tallies in and probably explains that loose connection. The other things that I just wanted to talk about, which I thought were really interested on this, involved our leaders and involved Stephen Fry. So I just quickly mentioned those because I thought this was quite interesting. They talked about David Cameron. If you're abroad, if you're not from the UK, David Cameron is the Prime Minister, and he is a self-confessed Christian and has mentioned it a number of times. Now, of our three main parties, at the last election, Nick Clegg, who is presently the Deputy Prime Minister, the Liberal Democrat leader, he's in coalition with the Conservatives. He is an atheist, and he's stated he's an atheist. Ed Miliband, who is the Labour leader, he is an atheist. He has stated that he is an atheist. So the question that was asked about all of those is, would you regard these people, do you regard these people more positively or less positively because of their belief or lack of belief? And the interesting thing is, quite pleasingly really, is that the majority of people on all these cases, it doesn't make any difference. But in terms of, from an atheist perspective, what's quite interesting is that actually, and this is going to be quite shocking perhaps for people in the United States, Nick Clegg is an atheist. 11% of people would view him more positively for that reason, 6% more negatively, so it stands in his favour. Ed Miliband, 10% more positively, 6% more negatively. David Cameron, the Christian, more positively 8%, more negatively 7%. So you actually do better declaring yourself an atheist than declaring yourself a Christian. Now, you can't work out from those stats why that is, but if you look at the actual numbers themselves, the actual numbers of how religious people answered that question and how Christians answered that question, it's quite illuminating, because what it tells you is, especially when you look at Christians who believe in a God, Christians who believe in a God discriminate with respect to the atheists, and the people with no religion do discriminate with regard to a Christian. Okay, so there is a difference. But that difference is masked within society as a whole, and we only get these small percentages, 15 or 20% of the population being swayed by that factor. I think largely because most people, it's not the overriding factor. It's not as important to people in the UK as it perhaps is some other countries. But the other thing is that there's quite a balance, as you saw in the earlier statistics, between people with a religion and people without a religion. So those people that are polarised and are bothered by these things, they kind of balance one another out by and large. Where it didn't balance out quite so much, what did polarise people quite a bit was Stephen Fry. They talked about Stephen Fry and about his speech he gave about how monstrous God must be to allow the things that he allows. And actually that polarised the views, especially the views of the Christians that believe in a God. 30% of the Christians who believe in a God view him more negatively, only 4% more positively. And of the people with no religion, 36% view him more positively, 3% more negatively. So I think the other thing that depends, just saying you're a Christian or saying you're an atheist, if you're a politician, that in itself isn't going to do you much harm. If you say you're an atheist, it might do you a little bit more good than harm. But it depends what it is that you're saying, and the more polarising the thing that you say, the more extreme the thing that you're saying, the more divisive the thing that you say, as you would expect, perhaps, the more of an impact that has. Well, that's kind of what I got from this. I'll leave you a link to this so you can peruse these statistics yourself. Like I say in the next video, I want to go through this Servation survey. It was a bit of a shorter one than this, but it had a couple of quite interesting questions, so I'll have a look at that one next time. Well, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this little run through, and bye for now.